Jazz, America's authentic art. Toward the beginning of the 20th century, jazz emerged as one of America's most popular genres of music. Despite ongoing racial issues and discrimination towards people of color, jazz was a genre performed by predominantly black artists. Jazz is a unique genre to say the least. Its improvisational style makes it unlike most other music forms. When listening to jazz, you will hear many brass instruments including the trumpet and trombone, most often accompanied by a piano. While jazz may be composed using the same instruments, each jazz artist will sound different in the way they choose to compose their piece.
Simple answer to where jazz began is that it developed from the ragtime music style. However, to fully understand how jazz came to be what it is today, one must look at the full picture. The formation of jazz can be dated back to the Louisiana Purchase. New Orleans is the place in which jazz really took its shape and form. After the Louisiana Purchase, many African Americans moved to New Orleans. A separated area of New Orleans, designated as Uptown, brought blues, spiritual, and rural dances. New Orleans' diversity differed from the rest of American cities through its different ethnic and cultural traditions. These practices eventually led to the development of jazz. During the mid-18th century, African Americans and slaves had social gatherings in the Congo Square, a special market where they socialized using traditional African dances and music. These gatherings ended before the Civil War occurred. However, another tradition emerged as a result of the gatherings. Mardi Gras Indians were African Americans who wore masks to represent American Indians. The Mardi Gras Indians would celebrate American Indians on Mardi Gras Day. They celebrated using music and chanting similar to that of traditional West African and Caribbean music. The music from the Mardi Gras Indians and many other ethnic groups later transformed into jazz. Celebrations like Mardi Gras Indians helped the development of brass, marching bands, and other music styles like ragtime emerge. Many public events in New Orleans began including music like brass marching bands and ragtime. Jazz at first was a music meant for dancing in New Orleans, but it would soon spread to the rest of the world. Artists began touring and sharing their music to cities around the country. The original Dixieland Band was the first band to commercially record their music and became a hit and started a nationwide trend. Pioneering the development and spread of jazz throughout America included these legendary musicians: Duke Ellington, Miles Davis, Billie Holiday, and Louis Armstrong. Duke Ellington, known by numerous of jazz critics as the greatest single talent in the history of jazz, is most recognized for his composition and arrangement of thousands of jazz songs by his big band orchestra. Ellington was born on the 29th of April, 1899, to a modestly successful family in Washington, D.C. He started studying the piano by the age of 7 and was interested in the arts as a child. Ellington returned to music by his young 20s and got his big break in 1927 with his band called the Duke Ellington Band at the Harlem's Cotton Club, a site for national radio broadcasts. Ellington was adaptable to the changes in jazz throughout the 20th century and became more successful as his career carried on. Ellington became so famous that he went to the Soviet Union in 1971 and acted as a diplomat between the United States and the USSR to help ease tensions during the Cold War. Ellington died in 1974 in New York City, New York, due to lung cancer. He will be remembered for his ability to unite the world through the use of music and his composition genius.
Louis Armstrong was born on August 4th, 1901. Louis Armstrong had a rough childhood, but he persevered through this childhood and was able to become one of the most famous jazz artists of all time. Louis Armstrong grew up in New Orleans and was always around jazz music. Louis Armstrong decided to have his try at being a jazz artist and got help starting his music career from King Oliver. He was able to be a part of an important record named Froggy Moore. In 1925, he went solo and targeted a mainly black audience. During this time, the Hot Five, a series of 5 dozen records, were made and considered by many critics as the most important body of work in jazz. During this development time, Armstrong switched to playing the trumpet and started to sing. During the 1930s, Louis Armstrong became a leader of solo jazz for his singing and trumpet skills. After World War II, the new bebop movement took over the music industry and brought down Armstrong with his swing bands. However, due to Armstrong's personality, he regained relevance in the late 1950s and 1960s and even outperformed the Beatles in 1964 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. Louis Armstrong was known primarily as a singer by the end of his career and performed for the audience's approval. Armstrong died July 6, 1971 from a heart attack and will forever be remembered for his development in jazz in late 1920 and for being the face of jazz and music by the late 1950s and 60s. Billie Holiday, one of the most famous jazz singers of all time, lived a life of success and tragedy. Holiday was born April 7, 1915. Holiday grew up in Baltimore, Maryland and had a troubled childhood. That was partly because her dad was absent most of her life. She was raped by a neighbor at age 11 and also received education only up to the 5th grade. As a teenager, she moved to New York to be with her mother and worked as a prostitute. She was charged with prostitution at age 15 and spent 4 months in a workhouse. After being discharged, Holiday was looking for work to provide for her ill mother and was hired as a singer in New York clubs. In 1933, Holiday signed to a Columbia record after John Hammond was astonished by her singing. Holiday dealt with many racial issues and behavioral problems throughout her career, usually having to deal with her childhood trauma. Holiday's signature song Strange Fruit dives deep into the racism that black musicians faced and stunned her audience with her singing. Holiday developed a drug addiction through her time of performing in clubs, which ended her life. Holiday died July 17, 1959. Miles Davis, born May 25, 1926 into a well-off family, began playing the trumpet at age 10 in St. Louis. Early in his life, Davis experimented with bebop. However, his trumpet skills did not fit the bebop style, and he decided to change his focus to West Coast jazz. In 1955, Miles Davis formed his most famous quintet, including members like John Coltrane. This group had immense success and eventually started to disperse off but never fully died out. Members like John Coltrane left and they never reached the success that they had in 1955. Davis is now remembered for his amazing trumpet skills, but also his unique personality. He struggled with racism all throughout his life and perpetuated back racism on others. He then died in 1991 to pneumonia, respiratory failure, and a stroke. As jazz became more popular during its early stages, its influence spread to other parts of the world and even became one of America's greatest exports. American performers began touring in different countries, which eventually led to the emergence of jazz artists in foreign parts of the world. In a letter written by Richard Nixon and sent to Duke Ellington, it explains that the music that he was performing helped represent our nation and create stronger ties between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. Jazz was developed in the middle of immense racial issues across America. Slavery had recently been abolished when jazz emerged, and African Americans were still not an accepted member of society by white citizens. Jazz, however, gave light to some of the talent of African Americans. The audience of jazz was generally white, but the musicians were often black. While many musicians still faced oppression and racism from their audience, it was a start towards a country in which black and white citizens could live in unison and accept each other's talents. Throughout time, many people's understanding and appreciation for this beautiful art has grown. A study conducted from 1982 to 1992 shows a significant increase in people who are listening and enjoy jazz. Jazz still plays a significant role in the American identity today. Majority of Americans know the icons like the ones covered in this video. They have a lasting effect on jazz, America, and the world. Their music is still known and enjoyed all throughout the country. Many other cultures and countries have created their own form of jazz based off American jazz, like French jazz. In New Orleans, jazz still plays a major role in the life of the city. They often conduct traditional jazz performances all throughout the town. Jazz's influence on America and the world is most certainly felt today. Jazz's improvisational style has led the art form to create new styles of music like rap, hip-hop, and gospel music, which are most prevalent in our world today.
Overall, jazz was a leading factor that helped bring many people, communities, and entire countries together. Jazz is truly one of America's distinctive art forms, which can be found and listened to all over the world today.